Welcome to the SkillTorch Disrupt Podcast, where we dive into the world of innovation and technology. My name is Melica, and I'm the founder of SkillTorch, which is a recruitment company within the AI and tech space across the globe. Today, I have with me Jason Corso from Voxel 51, who is the co-founder and chief scientific officer. He's joining us to talk to us a bit more about his journey from academic roots to open source to tech entrepreneurship. Jason, lovely to finally have you on here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, Melica. Thanks for the invitation.
Likewise. Well, it would be great if you can tell the audience a bit more about yourself and your background.
Certainly. So, I self-identify as a creator. I really love building things, and that began, when I was a kid, learning how to program and making like pixels move around the screen on my Commodore 64. And then all the way through being an academic at the University of Michigan, right? Like it's the ideal career path for someone who just likes to create and build and really be the self-steward of the career path. And then it's at a certain point, I was thinking like I'm getting older, right? Like been in the field for like 20 years now, thinking about what is the most impact that I can have, right? Like I can write more papers. But there are other angles of impact. And I have done some consulting over the years to dabble in that notion. But the idea for Voxel 51 was essentially founded on this idea of how can I directly create more of a near-term impact in the tech sector.
Right. So, and remind me, what does Voxel 51 do?
Oh yeah, so my research area is all about computer vision, video understanding, the relationship between like vision and language and robotics. And as part of that journey, built up a lot of experiences around the notion of like when you actually have a task at hand and you want to build a computer vision model, rather than just thinking of it as like let me go get my data and pull it from somewhere easily and then focus on my algorithm or model, which is kind of like the classical way of doing it, that it's more of a co-development between like the data resources you have and what you do with them and the modeling resources you have and what you do with them. And so this like co-development of data and models to yield AI capabilities ultimately led to what is a software called 51, which is Voxel 51's key piece of software. So 51 is an open source toolkit that allows you to essentially do that co-development of data set work and modeling work with an emphasis on easy access to analysis in your software ecosystem, right? So like, if I have 1 million samples in my ImageNet data set or whatever, and I want to train a model to do classification or detection or whatever, right? If I'm only looking at aggregate scores over how my models are performing on that data, I don't really know how to go and like add more annotations or add more data samples to my data set, right? Like, or even how to change my modeling approach. What you really need to do is like look at the corner cases and write these like, queries, essentially naturally query your work in a way that is easy. And so 51 really supports that querying approach through either natural language or a Python language, or like a Python SDL, if you will. That allows you to like turn the work you're doing into a more rapid and effective understanding of your data and your modeling.
Okay, very cool. Thanks for providing us with that overview. So going back to your journey then, prior to starting the company. So I know you mentioned, 20 years, you thought, right, I'm going to go and, basically do a career pivot. What was like the biggest driver in terms of doing that? And how was that transition?
It's a good question. Like understanding what turns, in some sense, impulses into action, right? Like, on the one hand, like I was like the initial idea for Voxel 51 really came about around 2015, 2014, maybe let's just say 2015. My co-founder Brian Moore and I were chatting, right? Like, so I met Brian when he took one of my computer vision courses at Michigan, actually.
All right.
And it's just really like star student, stellar individual, really capable. We were just talking about like, is there a business actually in like the type of work that I was doing in the lab at the time, right? Like video understanding, right? Like my research group at Michigan was all about, okay, you give us pixels in a video volume, we will turn them into insights. Like that's why we're called Voxel 51. That was the initial idea for the company, really. Um, and the actual initial impetus was rather opportunistic. I became aware of a grant funding program from the Department of Commerce in the U.S., NIST, and we built a relationship with the program manager and with like Baltimore City Police. They have a great like public sort of safety camera network, and we initially were funded by a research grant as a company to do explorations around the idea. And I think we were willing to take the leap for that reason, right? There was funding available, non-diluting funding for any startup, right? Like, so essentially we were able to not only begin to build a company, but also talk to a lot of potential users and understand what their needs were. And really it was like those conversations with the potential users that ultimately gave rise to 51, because as I was just saying, like our current company, like we open sourced 51, we released it August of 2020, so about 3 years ago, three and a quarter years ago now. That is a rather different piece of like go-to-market motion than the initial idea of turning video pixels into insights, right? Like, but that rationale came from those conversations with so many potential users that were really part of that initial grant that we had from the government. Like the key things we learned through those conversations were along the lines of, well, video is everywhere. There's something like 50 billion cameras worldwide. Like on my desk here, there are like, I don't know, 6 video cameras looking at me right now, right? Like kind of wild. Yet aside from entertainment, right? Like maybe sports, right? Like sports analytics, it's unclear, like at least at the time, like 3-4 years ago, it was pretty unclear, like are companies across different verticals willing to spend money on video yet, right? Like what is the ROI to be able to process video? And they were asking the same questions of us, really. And so ultimately, we observed that despite the initial interest on these innovation teams and the existence of capabilities from like AWS recognition and Google Video Intelligence, which are like more larger scale cloud-based approaches, these companies were beginning to build teams internally to like build out these internal capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And we decided that the right pivot, if you will, as a startup, or the right go-to-market was to really meet those nascent teams where they are, right? Like, so they need tools. What tools do you need? Well, you need tools to like quickly look at your video and your images. And now we support point clouds as well, but another story. But like, and then be able to ask good questions about those media data through an extensive or extensible software framework. So it's kind of an interesting journey in my view, right? Like, and for me, like as a creator, I've learned a lot, right? I have no business training whatsoever. I have no sales training whatsoever, no marketing training. But right, like if you're willing to kind of go to bat for the idea and for your customers, then like I can build a pretty capable software. Like we have something like 1.8 million downloads of the open source toolkit. Like on the order of a dozen Fortune 500 companies signed up for our commercial version. It's been a good journey. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, I mean, clearly you've got a lot of drive there and you've got a lot of passion in terms of the product that you're building. What was stepping into that entrepreneurial world, what was some of the unforeseen challenges that you face and how did you kind of adapt to that?
Well, I mean, the biggest challenge is, right, like as an academic, I write a lot of proposals, or I've written a lot of proposals over the years, and a lot of academic papers, right? Like like the basic economy of an academic are those two things and your ability to teach to some degree, right? Like you can even not be a great lecturer or teacher and still thrive in academia. Those are not really the training that you need to either secure funding as a startup or to like sell to any customer, right? Like I can convince a darker program manager, for example, like that this idea, it has a lot of potential for very good, meaningful reasons, but it's all potential, right? There's no ROI yet. It's all about what may be. And you have to make a really good sort of convincing argument. And initially one thinks that that's what's going to work for on the investing angle. And it does to get, you get a conversation through that, but investors are, want more, right? And for great reasons, right? They want to know, like, not only is there potential in this, but how has that potential already turned into practice, right? So that's why I think, like, Brian and I both had to go pretty deep in these customer conversations to really understand what is the core problem, right? Like everyone's, it's not like Gen AI is that novel, right? Okay, there's great new capabilities now, but like we've been thinking about what AI can do for years and years upon years. And so one has to understand how to map that potential to actual problem. Like, when you're going to spend $1 or spend a minute for open source or spend $1 on a commercial product, right? Like it has to do something of value for you, right? That's why, like, even like 51 is so extensible, because we've learned so much from how our users want to use our software that we realized, well, the best way to enable them to like kind of extend it or like use it the way they want to is make it extensible. So that, you can write like front end plugins, back end plugins. You can plug the front end to the back end, like plug it into a compute cluster as well. Like all that comes from our understanding that, like, in this quickly, rapidly evolving like machine learning frontier, we don't know how users are going to want to use anything, our software, right? So like they're gonna demonstrate that desire based on how they how they spend their time, and ultimately, like, that journey to go from like we think we know everything to, oh no, wait, we don't really know anything, we just know how to act based on what our users are telling us, is has been a really fun and interesting journey for me. Probably the hardest one because smart person, analytical. No, I know the future. I'm going to predict it, but not exactly. And again, like so different than the academic route. But for me, it's been a fun and interesting journey.
I was going to ask you actually, how did you adapt to going from academia to actually focusing on AI innovation, especially now? Obviously, everyone talks about AI. I know AI has obviously been around for a while, but it's only really created noise recently. But surely that would have been a big transition for you to focus on that.
Well, I do think there are elements of the transition. There are elements of it that required certain transition, right? Like thinking about product and thinking about like how to package a certain capability in a way that people may want to download and use. But at the same time, I think like many academics in AI, or at least in my area, like in computer vision, we've been fairly applied, right? Like it's not like academics like me are in some white tower theorizing about some quantum capability for AI, whatever. That's not going to exist for decades upon decades. In some sense, the more surprising thing you could say is like, why did you start your own company when all your other colleagues were either pretty comfortable in academia and just going to stay there, or going to like FANG, right? Like going to FAIR research, Facebook research or Google research or Amazon or something like that. Like, I think that might be because that's a little bit more radical these days. And I think, like, and in my view, it was a risk, right? Like, you can go to FAIR, do great work, right? Like just one key example, I have a set of great colleagues at FAIR right now that have been doing this data set called Ego 4D. I think they just released something called Ego XO 4D, like really strong work that's like solidly at the boundary between what one wants to do in an academic lab and what one wants to do in an industrial machine learning lab. You have more resources, more GPUs, more money to hire people, like, so you can train bigger models, you can get bigger data sets, like really, really, really beneficial to do that. Or you can go the startup route and raise like some pittance, a few $1,000,000 is nothing compared to what you have at your disposal. And not only have to like embark in like a sort of limited resource direction, but also do it in a way that you have to demonstrate like almost immediate value, like value over the 2-year horizon or 3-year horizon, right? So like, and I guess the way when my students actually at the university ask me questions like this, like my answer is something along the lines of, well, I have like an irrational desire for like independence and control over what direction I take, and I'm kind of willing to take on the risk that gets associated with that. So it's been high risk, but also high reward. Even what, like we're only at the beginning of the journey in some sense, right? Like it's 3 years out. We're probably raising a new round pretty soon. But who knows where the next, 4 or 5 years will take the company.
You said you like control and taking ownership of that. So how's that then working with your other co-founder? In case
Oh,
he's listening.
yeah. Well, he'll probably listen to this as well. I think, well, I was reading a quote from, this is a Steve Jobs quote this morning I found on LinkedIn. Something like A players like to work with A players, right? Like, and since we founded the company, like I was the CEO for the first 5 years of Voxel 51. We recently transitioned where I'm the chief scientist now, and he took over CEO. We've basically run the company by committee. We talk about nearly every decision. Like some founding teams, especially if there's only two of them, like one will go really deep on like you're the technical guy and that's all you do. You don't ever talk about business. You don't ever talk about go to market, no marketing. And the other one's the business person. And like, you got the MBA, you go only do that. Neither of us had ever really, we have no business training, but we're very similar in that way, very technical founders. And so regardless, we were going to have to learn a lot when we did the company, right? So he was more technical for the beginning, and I was more organizational and more sort of go-to-market-y. But really everything we did was kind of discussed in committee, and it worked out pretty well, right? So when I say irrational affection for control or independence, maybe is probably the way I would say it. Irrational affection for independence. It's more like I just don't want some third party to come in and like whisper into my ear or really control what I think is how I should spend my time. Right? That's like we only have our time and energy, and so I want to be the one who stewards that to have the most impact.
Right. With regards to your time at the university, what sort of principles and methodologies has been really useful in running your business?
Well, I think, a lot of academics at least on the engineering side, it's probably quite different in the humanities, but it's kind of like you are already running a small business, right? Like, you have your own business unit. You have to raise money for it. No one's giving you any money. You have some operational things you have to do. Even like running a class, like in computer vision classes at the University of Michigan, when I began teaching, maybe there were 35 students in the class. Now we've had, 150 students, 250 students in the class. Like that requires a level of sort of personal management, if you will, or personnel management that, because you have a teaching staff to work with you. But I think more than those, like, I guess you could say obvious things, like as an academic, you, in a research, unit, you have a group of PhD students and postdocs that work with you or work for you in some sense. I like to think more with you. And the key learning, right? Like I think I've probably graduated on the order of 30, 20, maybe 24, something like that, 25 to 30 students with their PhDs over the last 15, 20 years. Everyone's different, like really different. I'm different. They're different. Everyone's needs are different. My own, I have 3 kids. Family, like, sometimes my own like circumstance impacts the way I will interact with someone. And like I learned, you have to be cognizant of that in order to have a healthy relationship outside of that circle, for example. So like, I think the value of the human connection is not to be underestimated, and like learning how to relate to like, I'm probably not the most emotionally intelligent person around, but learning the practices of like interacting with other people and helping other people and like, helping them become the best they can be and achieve the right goals together that you want. I think that's probably the most valuable learning that I had coming into the startup experience that I leveraged. Because most of the other things, how to write grants, not so useful. How to write academic papers, not so useful. I've written code at Voxel. That was pretty useful. But beyond that, really the human part of it was definitely translatable or transferable and important.
Right. Okay. No, thanks for giving us that overview. So Moving on to the topic on AI in particular, as you probably know, everyone wants to hear about that. How are you kind of seeing the machine learning and sort of AI landscape evolving?
Oh, it's evolving so rapidly. I think it's such an exciting time to be in this field, right? Like,
It is.
I mean, on the one hand, I didn't really answer this earlier when you were asking this, but like part of the reason why we stuck with Voxel beyond being stubborn and just really wanting to succeed is like, is this notion, stuck with 51, right? Like the software we released, like, is this notion that, um, people are going to like AI is happening no matter what, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so in order to have a good impact in the evolution of the space, I've been around for a while. I've developed best practices. Those best practices are in the lines of code of 51, right? Like, in order to develop a good AI system, you need to understand not only the numbers that your model has on some gold standard eval data set, you need to understand what training subsets led to those numbers and where are the failures, what are the critical cases, right? Like, and in order to do that, one needs to, like, the human element again is really important, right? You need to build an intuition over that co-development process of data and models. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so understand corner cases, visualize them, understand the relationship between different model configurations and those corner cases. Really critical process here. And so I think we just wanted to bring about what we believed is the right way to do sort of AI work, and that is in the world of 51 software, right? So like, so that's one angle of the
Mm-hmm.
evolving AI landscape or machine learning landscape, I guess you could say. I mean, I think another one is that they're like, we've seen huge progress within the last even 12 months or 24 months.
Yeah.
And let's say progress in like what we believe can be done, maybe, or what we observe is being done. But where I'm still seeing like a huge need for work and like deeper diving is that analysis side, like that understanding of what are the actual limitations, right? And what are the actual capabilities? It's very hard to like write down like what is, like, given this problem, will this method or that method perform better without doing any work? Can you, for many methods you don't really know, partially because, there's some classical work in the field, like, no free lunch or whatever, like where, for any given problem, you can't, one model or one approach is never going to be best always. There are always nuances. And so I think given these, like, this great progress we're seeing, we need more work in mechanisms to understand what's happening and understand the capabilities and the limitations. And would love to be part of that, frankly. And I think that's where personally I'll spend my research time in the coming years.
Great. And then looking forward, what part of sort of AI are you sort of most excited about affecting both the tech industry and then also academia?
Well, I think the way I structure my research direction at the
Mm.
university, and even like the way Voxel 51 sort of plugs into that, is this notion that, like, it is the human, right? Like, we build technology to help in our work, in some at a high level, right? Like, I think we've been a little bit hindered by some notion of autonomy, that like we can build these other systems out there that will just run on their own, and we can forget about them. And now we're, the new word for autonomy is just AGI. It's just an
What was it?
evolution of the term,
ACI, did you
really.
say?
AGI, like,
Oh, AGI.
like general AI, right? Like,
Mm.
um, um, I think the real exciting part of what we're observing now is that we can build cognitive systems, to put a term on it, that can interactively work with humans and learn from humans and even train humans at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Right? This notion that, that's why I call, like, autonomy sort of a misnomer, right? Like, it's not that I'm going to go build some physical system that can cook a dish in the kitchen for me, whatever, like that would be fine. But in the end, even when I am working in the kitchen, I have to interact with the rest of my family in order to understand what do we want for dinner tomorrow or tonight, or like there's everything is about the interaction. That's where I think the real work is. And I'm excited by the ability to have these interactive cognitive systems that can reason online, like in real time, and perceive online and in real time, and then even do so in a way that will continually learn and adapt to changing scenarios. I think that's where the real future is, so that we'll have like adaptive cognitive systems that can work alongside humans, learn from them and train them or teach them in ways that humans work alongside other humans now. I think that's the real great problem. And why is it a good problem? It's both like really cool technology, but it's also by and for humans, really, right? Like at the same time, humans are really messy. We do the darndest things all the time, and it makes for some really interesting AI problems to work through, I think.
Yeah, interesting. So last but not least, what advice would you give to academias that are potentially thinking about going into entrepreneurship?
What advice would I give to other academics who are considering companies? So I do
Especially
get
in
this
AI.
question a fair amount. Yeah, I do get this question a fair amount from other academics, and I guess so. So I've learned a few things. One is there are at least three different style companies that an academic can make. Like one is a consulting company, write SBIRs, do the same work you do at the university. One is like have your students start the company and you're on the board, and you don't really do much work. The other is really be an operator, like I've been, and like really run the company, build the company. The first two we don't really need to talk about too much because there's not much difference, not much risk in there. The second one, I think, sorry, the third one, where you're actually an operator, you really have to, like, this was much bigger than I expected. Much more work, much
That sounds
harder, much more painful. Like we grew, initially we were 4 people, we went to 14 people, we went back to 4. Now we're 28 or 30 or something like that, right? Like you have to be willing to, be stubborn and be willing to be committed. But also, like, the other key angle is that no one really knows how to do it. There are a lot of people out there who want to say they know what the right way to build a company is from 0 to 1. A lot of books you can buy, a lot of different ways to like do planning and OKRs and all that stuff. Like none of that works for you. You know what works for you, and I think that's you got to find out what is your way. And I think that's really key.
interesting. Well, thank you so much, Jason, for your time. Really appreciate your insights about your journey from education to starting the company. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Melica. This was a great pleasure to chat.
Likewise.